Just welcome to the training. I'm so glad to see so many people here. And again, the training is titled Take a Deep Dive into the Alaska BRFSS Data Center. And again, it's great to see so many of you. And I think we'll just start off with some introductions before we dive into the training content. So my name is Jody Barnett, and I work for the Alaska Division of Public Health in the section of Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. And I've been managing the BRFSS program for the last 4.5 years. So nice to see all of you. I'll turn it over to Megan.
Thanks, Jody, and thank you guys all for being here. My name is Megan Ackerman, and I'm a biostatistician at the Alaska Native Epidemiology Center at ANTHC. I'm really excited to be here, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Tony. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tony Clark. I'm a public health analyst for the Alaska Native Epidemiology Center with ANTHC.
Okay, well, I'm going to dive in just a little bit of background about BRFSS for those of you that don't know. So the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, again, often called BRFSS, is a national system of health-related telephone surveys driven by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, otherwise known as the CDC. So all 50 states and some territories participate, and it collects annual prevalence data about health behaviors, preventative health practices, and health status among Alaska adults. So data is collected over the phone using randomly selected telephone numbers, and approximately 5,000 surveys are completed each year to produce statewide or regional estimates in Alaska. So to learn more about the BRFSS methodology, including how data is collected and weighted, and any strengths and limitations, please visit our State of Alaska webpage, which is included in the chat. Hopefully someone can drop that in. We also have a little bit about it as well in the data center. So there's a couple places you can find out more. And so it's beyond the scope of this training, but yeah, there's a lot of information you can find in those places. So the Alaska BRFSS Data Center was launched in really early 2023, and it was developed through a partnership between the Alaska Division of Public Health and the Alaska Native Epidemiology Center within the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. So it was created to increase access to and use of Alaska BRFSS data. There wasn't anything in place before that for a little while. So Holt Consulting is our absolutely amazing contractor and has been instrumental in bringing this tool to life. So anyone in Alaska can access the data center, which currently houses survey data from 2011 to 2023. And we just added the 2023 data. I think it was last week. So it's new and it's in there. And if you haven't been in there recently, that's a new addition. So annual data will continue to be added over time, and changes to the data center will be incorporated, based on user feedback from people like yourselves. So after today's training is concluded, we'll have about 10 minutes of time for questions. And if you have any suggestions or want to provide us any feedback, we're really open to that. So you'll be muted during the training. And if any questions pop up, just feel free to add those in the chat as well. And we can read those off at the end of the training. And then we'll go from there. So we can go ahead and begin. So once you've navigated to the data center with the link in the chat, which I think Tony put that in there. Yep, I can share my screen. Thank you for that. Now, okay. Sorry about that, a little glitch. I think we are live now. Can you guys, I'm not able to load the data center right now, so that's just kind of a worst case scenario, right? There we go. So hopefully you guys can all see this. This is the data center, and it looks like it's kicking me off right now. So somehow there's some technical difficulties, but there's typically a user screen. There's just some things that you need to agree to before you enter the data center. And I think the biggest thing I want to just highlight is that we really want you to just share BRFSS as a source of data, and we have a suggested citation in there to use. So if you use data from the data center, you're sharing it in publications or with your colleagues, just to really cite BRFSS as a source of data and really make that known. I think sometimes BRFSS data is used a lot, but people don't always know where that data is coming from. So I really encourage that. So I will turn it over to It looks like Megan is up next, and hopefully you have a little bit easier time loading the data center.
All right. Thanks, Jody. I hope you guys can all see my screen. I cannot see the chat right now, so I do apologize, but it looks like the BRFSS data center is working for me. So as Jody mentioned, the first thing that pops up is this user agreement. So hopefully you guys can all take a moment, read through this, and go ahead and check all those boxes and click agree, and then you'll be taken to the homepage. And it looks like I also got disconnected, so we're going to try this again. Fingers crossed this will keep working. All right, so like I said, this is the home tab, and we're going to spend the majority of our time today actually on other tabs. So again, once you've read through that user agreement and selected I agree. Oh no.
Megan, this is Hillary. I've been trying since before we started this meeting, and I have not been able to get on. I get the same thing.
This could be a little bit of a problem for the training right now, and I feel absolutely awful. I'm going to try to reach out to someone. Let's try to keep moving forward, but if we can't, we'll probably have to stop the training and try to reschedule it, which is a big bummer, but I'll try to see if we can do something about it right now.
Cool. Thank you. And I mean, I can go through, we do have, I mean, I can kind of give a walkthrough to the best of my ability, and feel free to interrupt me. But again, I know it's kind of nice to have that visual as we go along. So again, the user agreement will pop up. We'll be able to agree. Again, there's a number of tabs. The first that I'll just mention briefly is the About Alaska BRFSS tab, which contains information relating to the history, methodology, limitations, and technical details. It's also where you can view other the BRFSS questionnaires. So basically the survey that goes into creating the Alaska BRFSS data is available. And again, there's a link here. There's also two other tabs up top here. The Explore Indicators tab, which is where if we can get the data center to work, we'll spend the majority of our time today. There are three options underneath that. The single indicators, the multiple indicators, and the cross tabulations. And then this other tab over here, the last one on the right, is tutorial videos. And if you take a look, there's a slightly outdated kind of walkthrough of the data center, and we recommend you watch it if you haven't already. Please note, again, as I mentioned earlier, the video may be slightly outdated as the Alaska BRFSS Data Center has been updated visually and has added new features over time, but it's a potential resource that is available for you here. Let's see, maybe this will work. Again, if I go ahead and select single indicator, it'll take me here. And so the first thing you do when you get to the Explore Indicators tab is to go ahead and select a topic. So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and select cancer and cancer screening. And then you need to select an indicator. So in this example, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to select colorectal cancer screening 2008 USPSTF 50 to 75. And that stands for the 2008 United States Preventative Task Force guidelines for those 50 to 75 years of age. So once you've made your topic and indicator selection, please note that you'll have a figure and a table populate accordingly. So what do we see? So by hovering over in our bar graph here in the yes response, we kind of see the response estimate. So in this case, we see that 63% of Alaskans aged 50 to 75 met the 2008 colorectal cancer screening guidelines in 2018, 2020, and 2022. We also see that same percent here down in the table. But we also see some other features. We see or some other columns, excuse me. We see the 95% confidence intervals, the RSE, and the flag. So what do we mean by 95% confidence intervals? So if we did this survey 100 times, 95 of the 100 generated confidence intervals would contain the true estimate. We also see our relative standard error, which is known as the RSE. And the RSE tells us about the reliability or the stability of the estimate. And essentially, the higher the RSE, the more unreliable the estimate is. And please note that high RSE values often occur due to small sample sizes. BRFSS currently flags, and I will refresh my screen in just a moment here. I do apologize, sorry guys. BRFSS currently flags with this flag column an RSE between 30 and 50, which means the estimate should be used with caution. And BRFSS suppresses estimates when the RSE is greater than 50, which just means that the estimate is no longer reliable, which is why it's not shown on the Alaska BRFSS Data Center. I'm going to go ahead and click reload and see if I can maybe navigate over. Hopefully we won't have to do this too many times. All right, so we have our figure and our table once they populate. So there's a couple other things I want to show you for features that we have once we have kind of our estimate here. We see our confidence intervals below in the table, but we can actually add them to the graph, and you can do that by selecting Add Confidence Intervals here, and they'll populate on the graph above, which is great. We also can download the plot as a PNG using this option, and it'll just download wherever downloads are saved on your computer. We'll also have the option to download the table as a CSV using the download data option here. So again, just some additional features that are available. Take a moment and we're going to go back over to this gray box in the left-hand corner, or sorry, left-hand side. And we have some filters. So underneath the select filters options, by default, none are selected, but we can actually choose to look at particular race groups or geographic classifications, such as public health regions, behavioral health regions, and tribal health regions. And we're going to have a moment later in the training to talk about what each of those are. But for example, let's say I was interested, oh no, okay. Let's say I was interested in looking at the Anchorage public health region. It's like a game to see if I can beat the clock, see how well it works. So if, for example, I was only interested in the Anchorage public health region, once I've made that filter selection, you'll see the graph and the table below will respond accordingly. We can also select more than one filter at a time. So if I was interested in, this is Anchorage adults in Alaska from 2018 to 2022. If I was interested, in Alaska Native residents in Anchorage over the same time period, I can go ahead and add that. And just using the options here, both are checked. Go ahead and click outside that box, and the table and the graph would respond accordingly. All right, so we were looking at Alaska Native adults in Anchorage for colorectal cancer screening. Again, once that selection is made, our response variables change. I just want to show when we do have those confidence intervals in, the one thing to note is you'll notice that our confidence intervals got wider. So the more selections, more filters, the more we maybe subset down a little bit, you'll start to see our confidence intervals might get a little wider and our RSEs get a little bigger. Please note that these are not, we don't have to interpret these estimates with caution. They're not flagged. The RSE is definitely less than 30, but just something to be aware of as we move forward. The other thing before we move on to the trend tab here is that you can add or remove years. So if you were only interested in the most recent year of data, you could go ahead and select the years and say, in this case, 2022. So my graph and my table respond accordingly. And that's that. So I'm going to, just before we move over to the trend tab, I'm going to deselect all of my filters on the left here, just so we can go back to what we were originally looking at. So I'm going to move on to the trend tab. So when you move over to the trend tab, you'll see a line graph showing estimates for meeting or not meeting the 2008 colorectal cancer screening guidelines. In this case, it's defaulted to 2012 to 2022. We also see our table has responded accordingly. So again, we could filter over here on the left. That is definitely an option, but I want to show you how to stratify up here by demographic. So we could, if we wanted, we could stratify by sex, race, age group, education level, the 3 different geographic classifications, and if there's children under 18 in the household. For this example, let's go ahead and look at sex. So when we do this, we actually end up with 2 different line graphs. So we have those that have met the colorectal cancer screening guidelines on the left here, and on the right, we have those who have not met the colorectal cancer screening guidelines. Our dark blue line is for men, and our yellow line is for women. So you'll also notice that we have this option to filter to the indicator response level. So you can go ahead and click yes. And if you're only interested in those who have met the colorectal cancer screening guidelines, or you can go ahead and say no if you're interested in only those who have not met the colorectal cancer screening guidelines. For this example, I'm going to go ahead and select yes. And again, the table, the graph and the table below will respond accordingly. All right. Again, we have some of the similar plot options. We can, and here they're actually kind of labeled plot options. If you were interested in only looking at kind of more recent years, you could go ahead and do that. You'll see that there's an option to select years. So I'm going to, for this example, let's say I was only interested in the last 2 years of data. But what happens when we only select 2 years of data? Our table populates with information, but we don't have a graph. And so the nice thing is there's a little note here that says, hey, 3 years of data are needed in order to display a trend. So we can go back into our plot options, add in a 3rd year of data if it's available. So now I'm looking at 2018 to 2022. Again, we also have the option to download that plot as a PNG, so you can use that as well. And as always, there is still the option to download the data as a CSV. All right. So for this next piece, I'm actually going to change my option for what I stratified by demographic, and I'm going to look at by race. I'm keeping my filter indicator response level to yes. So when I filtered by race, there's 3 options that are given. We have Alaska Native, white, and other race and ethnicity, so essentially everyone else in the state. And again, by default, I'm looking at all 3 demographic levels. So essentially, I'm comparing each of these groups to each other. Let's say I was only interested in one group. You can use the filter option, and it'll give you a new drop-down menu, and you can say, hey, what demographic do I want to filter by? And let's say, again, I'm interested in Alaska Native and American Indian adults. I can go ahead and select that, and my graph changes accordingly. Please note, as we start to make changes here, there's a new option that appears. And this one says add test for trend. And this will run a logistic regression model to see if there's a statistically significant trend over time. So I'm going to go ahead and click this. The data center is going to go ahead and run a logistics regression model, and it will output the results here. But it might be a little hard to interpret if you don't have a stats background, and that's okay. And that's why we have the Help Me Interpret button for some additional details. So you can go ahead and select that, and it'll tell you exactly how to interpret this. So in this case, we're going to be interested in the p-value for year, as well as the estimate for the year variable. So as it says here, we're typically a threshold of 0.05 is used for indicating statistically significant changes. So if the p-value is greater than 0.05, there is no significant trend over time. But if the p-value is less than 0.05 and the estimate for year is greater than 0, we say the trend is increasing. And if the p-value is less than 0.05 and the estimate for year is less than 0, we say it's decreasing. So let's take this information and go back to our results. So what's our p-value for year? Our p-value here is 0.11, which is definitely greater than 0.05. So there's no significant trend over time. And in other words, we would say the percentage of Alaska Native adults who met the colorectal cancer screening guidelines did not significantly increase or decrease from 2018 to 2022. All right, so take a step away from a little bit of that stats, and I'm going to go ahead and uncheck the add test for trend, and I want to show you one other way to filter here. So you might have noticed that underneath demographic levels, we can filter, or we can use this option called group. So filter allows us to look at one demographic, But if we wanted to compare one group to everyone else, we can use that using the group option. So when you first select group, it'll show you all the different levels, but we can go ahead and change that by using the select demographic level to group option. So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and click Alaska Native. And now I'm able to see the percentage of Alaska Native adults aged 50 to 75 who have met the colorectal cancer screening guidelines in comparison to those who are not Alaska Native or American Indian. And again, this is particularly helpful when you're trying to compare one group to everyone else versus each group in comparison to each other. All right, so that's it for the Trend tab. And with that, I'm going to move over to the Geographic tab. So when you first move over to the Geographic tab, the first thing you'll want to do is select a response level, because as you'll notice, there's no table and there's no figure. So let's say in this example, I'm interested in those who have not met the colorectal cancer screening guidelines. So if I select no here, see that a graph and a table will populate, and we're going to reload the data center and hopefully we'll continue here. All right, move over to single indicator. I'm going to go ahead, cancer and cancer screenings. I'm going to scroll down to colorectal cancer screening 2008. And then I'm going to go over to geographic. We were looking at those who have not met the colorectal cancer screening guidelines. And there we go. So our map populates over here to the right. And by default, we're looking at the public health regions. We're looking at the entire state, and by default, we have the three most recent years of data available. As with most of the options in the BRFSS data center, it's interactive, so you can hover over an area to get the response level and as well as the percent estimate and our 95% confidence interval. We also have a legend over here to the right. And if you so wanted, you could right click and drag, and you would, left click and drag, and you could zoom in over an area if that's of interest. You can double click anywhere and you'll go back to the entire map of Alaska. So one thing I want to highlight here is there's this little eye icon, and it tells you, what's essentially here. But if we select this, you'll see a description of the geographic regions. So like I mentioned, there's 3 in the Alaska BRFSS Data Center: behavioral health regions, public health regions, and tribal health regions. And you can see, what's included and who uses each of these different geographic classifications as needed. For this example, I'm actually going to go ahead and change our selection to tribal health regions. Once that goes through, you'll notice something happened here. And you'll notice that for both the Arctic Slope and the Northwest Arctic tribal health regions, they're white. There's no data there. If you hover and I get that box to come back up, you'll see it'll say NA for the percent. This is likely due to privacy or suppression rules. And you can see that in the table below, they have a dash here saying, no data was populated for this. However, we can attempt to get data for those regions by simply adding an extra year or years of data. So if I go ahead and add 4 years of data, we now have information for each of the tribal health regions. So just one way to get closer to whatever it is you're looking at. Some of the last features I'll mention here for the geographic tab is, please note that unlike the indicator and trend tabs, you have response levels for both yes and no, even though we've only selected no up here. So just be aware of that. As always, you can download the data as a CSV file, and you can download the map here as a PNG as well. All right, so I've talked a lot about some of the basic and more hidden features of the data center underneath the single indicators tab, but I want to take one moment and talk about a couple of the options that I have not mentioned on this left-hand panel over here. So I want to start with the About Indicator button. So if you select this, it's going to tell you more detailed information about the indicator that you've selected. So you'll see the name of the indicator, the description, what years of data are available. You'll also see the question or questions that are asked that in order to create this indicator. In this example, it's a composite indicator. So a number of questions are asked in order to produce this estimate. You'll also see where the question comes from. So in this case, it's a CBCS question, and sometimes you'll see additional information. Again, in this example, it's a link to the United States Preventative Task Force website. You can hit close to go back to the previous screen. If you're interested in a more global question, you can go ahead and use the data dictionary option here, and it has some drop-down menus. You can see what indicators are available for each of these general topics. You can also search. So if you're interested in something related to teeth, you could go ahead and say, hey, there's an oral health, and there is one indicator related to the permanent teeth removed. And it also shows you what years of data are available. I'm going to go ahead and click X to go back to my previous screen. And the very last thing I will show you is this settings option, and this allows you to change the color of the graphics. By default, it's an ADA accessible color palette for all of the figures that are generated, but you could change it to a basic, a warm, a vivid, a grayscale, or a blue scale option. All right. Well, I've given you a short overview of the single indicators tab, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tony Clark. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Great job navigating some technical difficulties. All right. Let's see if I'm in the data center. Okay, so we're going to dive into the cross-tabulation feature. So under the Explore Indicators tab, we have options for single indicator, which Megan just walked us through, multiple indicators, which Jody will cover next, and cross-tabulation. So we're going to click on cross-tabulation. And you'll notice that the cross-tabulation feature has similar options to the single indicator feature, but now we're choosing two indicators to examine together. So for the first example, I'm just going to walk through something that's relatively easy to interpret. So for topic 1, we're going to scroll down, and I'm going to select substance use. And then indicator options relevant to substance use will populate. So now we're going to scroll down, and I'm going to select under tobacco and e-cigarettes, current tobacco use, any type. Okay, so now we need to choose a topic for topic 2. For simplicity, we're going to choose demographics. And for indicator 2, we're going to scroll down. Under sex and gender, we'll select sex. And there's some other options here on this menu bar, but we'll get back to them. So right now we've chosen 2 topics and 2 indicators, and we're going to click the green Run button. Okay, so now we have some data to review. So we have a table here, which is sometimes referred to as a contingency table. The table populates a generic title for us. In this case, it's calling our table Prevalence of Sex by Current Cigarette, E-Cigarette, or Smokeless Tobacco Use. An easier way to say that might be something like people who answered a question about their current tobacco use by sex. So let's start by how we read this table. I like to start by finding where the table adds up to 100. I think it makes it easier to understand when we're trying to interpret a variable, because percentages that add up to 100 make sense to us. So let's examine our table. This far right-hand column adds up to 100. So we're going to read across the rows. Starting with the top row, we would say, of people who said that they currently use any type of tobacco, so that's the yes response row, 57.7% were male and 42.3% were female. And on the bottom row, same thing, we would interpret this across as of people who said they do not currently use tobacco of any type, so the no response row, 49.9% are male and 50.1% are female. So again, we're just reading across the rows. And we can see from our title here that the default response years are 2021 through 2023. We could change that if we want to. So changing response years is under optional data filters. So if we click this, we have the select filters option and the filter years option. The select filters option is similar to what Megan just went through. We can filter by race, age group, education level, and those geographic regions. And then we can also filter if there are children under 18 in the household. Okay. So for filter year, we click here, we can see, again, what we already know, that it had pre-selected 2023 through 2021, and we have years all the way back to 2015. We're going to deselect all, and for this example, I'm just going to select 2023. Perfect. And then now we have the green run button again, so we're going to click run. Okay, so our table's updated with the new statistics for just 2023. They are slightly different from what we saw before, of course. Same breakdown because we didn't change anything. So this is yes and no by male and female. And again, we just read across like we did before. So in 2023, of people who answered yes that they currently use tobacco products, we see 59% are male, 41% were female, and the table has some other options here. So we can show this as an ADA table if we want. So let's click that. Same information as before, but now we have the lower and upper 95% confidence intervals populated. We have the RSE, which is our error, and we have the flag column, which would show us a flag here if there was an issue with the data. And I know Megan said it earlier, but it bears repeating. So a 95% confidence interval means that if we surveyed these data 100 times, 95 out of 100 times, the true population statistics for this measure would fall into this range. Okay, so I'm going to unclick Show ADA Table. And then we'll look at the right-hand side here. So we have some options to compute the chi-square for the variables. We can swap the rows and columns, and we can add confidence intervals. So let's click the Compute Chi-square test. And we see the chi-square test p-value populates at the bottom left here of the table. And this one it says it's less than 0.01. So this means that there is a statistically significant association between current tobacco use and sex. We can swap rows and columns. So right now we're looking at yes and no, right? So of people who said yes, they use tobacco products, what percentage are male and what percentage are female? So we're going to click swap rows and columns and then reinterpret. So now it's divided by sex instead of yes and no. So now we would say of males, so reading across this top row, right? Of males who were asked if they use tobacco products in 2023, 27.2% said yes, and 72.8% said no. And then same thing for female, reading across the row again. Of females who were asked if they regularly use tobacco products in 2023, 20.5% said yes, 79.5% said no. So we have two ways to interpret these indicators, depending on what our question is. If our question is, of males who were surveyed, how many said they used tobacco, then we would want our rows to be divided by sex. If instead we want to know of people who said they use tobacco products, how many are male and how many are female, we would want to have our rows divided by the tobacco indicator, so that yes, no, like we saw in the beginning. And then we would swap back to answer that question. Okay. So that was a quick overview. Let's make this a little more complicated. So we're going to look at an indicator that's slightly more difficult to interpret. I'm going to go back to topic 1, and I'm going to choose, we'll scroll up here, and let's choose caregiving for our indicator. So now for our topic. So relevant indicators to caregiving will populate, and we're going to choose relationship to care recipient. Okay, and then now, for now, let's just keep the demographic selection just for ease. So we're going to click run. Oh, before that, let me just go over this. So we do have about indicators for 1 and 2. And under about indicators, so if we click about indicator 1, right, similar to what Megan showed us, right, we have indicator options, details here. So we can see the name of the indicator, the description. So for this one, it's hours per week spent providing regular care among, let's see, no, this is, sorry, it's not the one I wanted to choose. We're going to do time providing care. Let's do this one. Sorry, guys. Okay, so this is hours per week spent providing regular care among adults who provided regular care or assistance to someone with health problems or a disability in the past 30 days. And then we've got our years, which are 2017 through 2021. And we can see that this is a composite indicator, which many of the indicators in the Alaska BRFSS Center are, the Alaska BRFSS Data Center are. So this one's comprised of 2 questions. Did they provide care or assistance in the past 30 days? And if yes, how many hours? Okay, so we're going to close this now. Yep. Let's run this data. Perfect. Okay, so before, with our previous indicators, we had a 2x2 table, yes and no, and male and female. Now we have a 3x2 table. So we have time providing care, which has 3 options: less than part-time, which is less than 20 hours, part-time, which is 20 to 39 hours, and full-time, which is greater than or equal to 40 hours per week. And then we still have male and female. So just like before, we want to read across the rows. So we're going to look to see where it adds up to 100, right? So for just the sake of time, let's only look at the bottom row here. So for this is full-time hours, right? So we would interpret this row as, of persons who said they provide care full-time, 30.2% are male and 69.8% are female. And this is how we always interpret these tables. So let's try swapping the rows and columns. Make it. Our rows are now divided by sex, and our columns are time spent providing care. And then we'll reinterpret the bottom row again. So this would be, of females who provide care, 66.5% said they provide less than part-time care, 8.2% provide part-time care, and 25.3% provide full-time care. Because we checked the compute chi-squared option earlier, that's already populated for these indicators, and we can see that this is still less than 0.01. Oops. Data center. So less than 0.01 means that there is a statistically significant association between sex and time spent providing care. Okay, so we'll just go right back. Thanks for bearing with us, guys. Here we go. Okay. All right, so we had that chi-squared. We see it's less than 0.01. So we have a statistically significant association between the variables. We can add, let's see, we had swapped, I think, but regardless, it's statistically significant. We can add confidence intervals just like before. And then the confidence intervals populate on the graphs and in the table, but we can more easily visualize them with these nice graphs. And as Megan said, when we hover, it sort of automatically selects. So looking in this yellow bar, we can see that women provide full-time care more than men, more than males, but that for both male and female, right, the majority of time providing care is less than part-time. That makes intuitive sense, right? Many of us have busy lives, so it can be difficult to provide full-time or even part-time care. Let's see. So we're going to add to this one more time. Okay, so instead of demographics, for our topic, for topic 2, let's choose caregiving. And then we're going to choose what I had accidentally chose earlier. So we're going to choose relationship to care recipient. And we're going to run this. Okay, so now we have a much larger table. So our first example, we had a 2x2, then we had a 3x2, now we have a 4x3. And let's clean this up really quickly. So we're going to just unselect these options. This is going to swap to a 3x4. Okay, just make it nice and clean. Okay, so if you have the stats pre-selected, the data center will just sort of keep that option for you whenever you make selections. So, okay, so let's try and interpret this table. Again, for ease, we'll just focus on the bottom row here, which is full-time hours, and it's divided by the relationship to care recipient. We have spouse or partner, parent or in-laws, other relative, or non-relative. So again, interpreting just this bottom row, we would say 22.8% are a spouse or partner, 19.7% are a parent or in-law, 50.9% providing full-time care is other relative, and 6.5% is a non-relative. And just pointing out something that's like I thought was interesting from this data, right? This is an interpretation exercise, right? For a person providing full-time care, we have 50.9%. That's other relative, and so other relative, we can see that we have spouse or partner, parent or in-law, non-relatives. We couldn't say it definitively, but this is likely an adult child of the care recipient, could be a cousin, so on. But just pointing it out because part of this exercise is sitting with these variables, try to make sense of them, and is very important. So it's not just about reading the statistics, but sitting with your variable options, making sure they make intuitive sense to you. Okay, so the table's less busy because we unchecked everything. We'll compute that chi-squared test again, which is still statistically significant. So we have a statistically significant association between time providing care and relationship to the care recipient. Let's swap our rows and columns. Okay, so now we're doing the same thing. We're going to interpret the bottom row. It's now divided by relationship to care recipient. So in this bottom row of non-relatives, 88.6% spent less than part-time providing care, 5.6% spent part-time providing care, and 5.8% spent full-time providing care. And then when we add our confidence intervals, and again, we can scroll down, we can view our graphs, and we can pretty easily see with these graphs that regardless of relationship to the person, to the care recipient or patient, most people are spending part-time providing care. And that's this blue bar here, which is a good segue to these optional graph filters, or sorry, these settings here. So this settings, we have graph filters too, but this is where we can customize these colors if we want to. So the default is ADA accessible. We could choose basic, or I like the warm color, whatever makes it easier for you to interpret these variables. The optional graph filters, we can filter the graph by either of our indicators. If we wanted to only look at less than part-time, for instance, and then it would filter for us. Perfect. So they affect the bar graphs here, not the table above. We can also look at stacked bar graphs if we want to. They do take away the confidence intervals. So like this. And then we do have the option, just like Megan pointed out, in the single indicator, we can download the data here in the download data button. And then at the bottom, you can download the plot. Okay, so to recap this section, right, we read across our rows, read across the rows in the tables to interpret the variables, look for where the row adds up to 100. I think that makes it easy to interpret. Make sure the variables make sense to you. You can compute the chi-squared, which tells you if there's a statistically significant association between the variables. You can swap the rows and columns and then reinterpret your variables. You can add and interpret confidence intervals and alter the graphs. So hopefully this gives you some insight into using cross-tabulation. If you have any questions, the email address for the Alaska BRFSS Center is at the bottom of every page of the data center. And with that, I will pass it off to Jody, who's going to go through the multi-indicator feature and close us out.
Thank you so much. those were two really great demonstrations, and it looks like the data center is working a little better right now, which is great. It just sounds like we had a lot of activity on there. So I'm gonna close this out with a brief look at the multi-indicator feature, and hopefully I do not have any trouble like I did earlier. Here we go. Okay, so I just want to encourage everyone to look at this new multi-indicator feature, which was just recently added to the data center, I think about 2 to 3 weeks ago. And it was based on some user feedback about something that they would find useful and helpful in navigating through the data center and for how they would like to use the data. So it allows users to obtain estimates for several health indicators all at once rather than one at a time, as in the single indicator option, which Megan went over earlier. This can be useful when developing reports that incorporate many indicators for a specific region or population group. So future trainings will focus on this new feature a bit more, but I wanted to provide a short demonstration right now to get you started. So let's make our way back to the Explore Indicators tab at the top. And this time we're going to select multi-indicators or multiple indicators in the list. So now I'm going to select 3 indicators from the select indicator list. However, in practice, we can select as many as we want. So first, I'm going to select body mass index, and we'll select overweight or obese. I'll select general health. We have a 2-category option. I'll go ahead and select that. And then the last one, healthcare access. So anyone who has unmet medical needs due to cost, I'll go ahead and select that as well. And so as I select the indicators on the left, you'll see them show up on the screen to the right at the top. So that way you can kind of keep track of what you've selected as you're going through, rather than trying to go back and see what you've checked. So it's just a way to keep track of what you've selected. Under the Select Indicators feature, we can select filters. There are less filters than in the single indicator feature, but you can select any region of interest, sex, or race and ethnicity. I'm not going to select anything right now, but I just wanted to let you know that some of these filters are available. And then underneath that, we have a couple of options in terms of what years you want to look at. So the most recent year, I'll select first so you can see what that looks like. And what it will pull is 2023, which really is the most recent year of data. And it pulls all of these indicators together into one simple table that you can also download with this download data feature. So again, you get the same results as you would in the single indicator feature, but it's, again, multiple indicators all at once. And it's really, again, really helpful when you're writing a grant report or you need multiple indicators all at one time. You don't have to go through, multiple steps with the single indicator feature. I also want to demonstrate what this looks like if you select most recent 3 years combined. So I'll click on this box right below it, or the circle. And you can see the 3 most recent years of data pulled in, which is 2021 to 2023. With all of these, with these 3 indicators, and those dates are listed there. And you can click all years combined. I'm not really sure. That seems like overkill. We can do that, but in this case, it would be, I think, about, the system just got overloaded. It would be about 13 years of data. So, in some cases, some indicators are only asked every 2 years or every 3 years, so there's less years to pull in. These are all indicators that are asked every single year on the survey, so it's just a lot of data. And this looks like the system is just a little overloaded right now. So that's just a brief snapshot of the Explore Indicators feature under the multiple indicators, and I just encourage you to go in and play around with it, and we'll have some future trainings on that as well as needed. But before we transition to the question and answer portion of the training, I really want to emphasize that the Alaska BRFSS Data Center will meet most of the BRFSS data needs in Alaska, but probably not all of them. So, for example, we aren't able to incorporate every demographic group or indicator in the data center for several reasons. So we encourage you just to email us. We are really responsive in terms of data requests, and we do our best to respond to all data requests within 3 weeks. So please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything specific that you need that the data center is not giving you.